Well, hello, Patty Aubery. It's so nice to have you here.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
I am so excited. So I know you probably don't want me to do this, but I do have to, do a formal introduction. I think I would not be doing any service to you without doing that. So Patty Aubery, we are so excited to have you here. You are the mastermind behind the billion-dollar brand Chicken Soup for the Soul, and you were the former president of the Canfield Training Group and author of 14 plus, I'm sure, plus 14 New York Times bestselling books. And you've had a successful role as a coach, a business strategist, and you've dedicated years to empowering speakers, authors, and trainers. She helps them confidently share their stories and expertise, creating a lasting and powerful impact on their audiences. So whether it's building a business around your book or wrapping a product or service around your message, or coming up next, the killer keynote to convey your mission, Patty's with you every step of the way. So that's just a small portion of your life, Patty. And you have like a whole new life right now in front of you with so many things that you're doing. I've been involved with you from permission granted programs, train the trainer with the Canfield companies. And I don't know, you've really been an integral part of my life for like the last, I'd say 6 years, since I was probably even longer than that, maybe 7 at Breakthrough to Success. You were the person next to Jack, and you actually resonated so much with me. And you've been just a wonderful mentor for me, and my daughter too. So,
thank you.
So thank you and welcome. And tell me a little bit. I always kind of think, I want to know, I think a lot of the audience would love to know more about Patty Aubery. I love your story, where you grew up in California, how you got involved with Chicken Soup for the Soul, and from there. So tell me a little bit, high school and how you met Jack and then had this wonderful blossoming career.
Well, I grew up in the Valley, so I'm an official Valley girl. So I will say, oh my God, for you. Um, 4 kids in my family. I was the oldest daughter, kind of always the driver, always wanting the best jeans and the best this. My dad would always say to me, "Who are you and where are you from?" Because we didn't have any money. So I had the family where my mother would buy 10 pairs of really cheap jeans. I'm like, no, I'll take the one pair of good. It's quality, Mom, not quantity. So I was kind of the odd duck in the family. And then I went off to San Diego State and went to school there. And then I moved to Santa Barbara. I got into tech, which I realized at that time, I didn't like it. Tech was a lot different then, Nora. It wasn't, you couldn't use ChatGPT to write your code. It was painful. So I moved back to LA after a few years and didn't know what I wanted to do. I was about 24. And before I left my last job in tech, my boss there had said to me, he said, "I'm leaving." And that was part of the reason I left too, because I really loved him and I didn't like the rest of the company. But he said, "Why don't you come to this training? I'm going to become a trainer." And I'm like, "What is that? And why? What are you doing?" This guy was amazing in software. So I went to a Bucky Fuller training that he was teaching actually. And I learned how to set a goal. I'd never been exposed to self-help. I had never set any goals in my life at all. And so I went and I set this goal to make $25,000 a year, by, I think it was December 1st, 1990. And so I started looking in the LA Times for a job because there was nowhere else to look at the time. There was no internet. And I saw this job. It said $25,000 a year in bold. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is a sign. This is it. And then underneath it said secretary wanted. And I cringed because I had a big joke with my father. I will never be a secretary. I don't need to take typing classes. And he insisted that I did, thank God. And, but I thought, you know what, I'm going to apply anyway, because I feel like the 25,000 is so bold. It must be a sign. So I applied and I waited and I waited and I didn't hear back and I waited and finally I get a call back and I came in to do an interview and it was actually Jack and his wife, Georgia, at the time. And they were doing self-esteem in the classroom work. And so when I got there, I thought it was really weird. I mean, this is pre-Chicken Soup for the Soul and this hippy-dippy condo, red shag carpet, remember the kind that you had to rake?
That's right. Yes, we're dating. Exactly. Yeah. We're dating ourselves, but yes, I do remember that.
It was that kind of carpet.
Raking carpets, yes.
Uh-huh. And so I got there. I thought this is really weird. And I interviewed at this tiny, I mean, tiny little kitchen table. It was enough room for really two. So we kind of did this. It was up against the wall in the kitchen. It was crazy 3-story condo. So I did the interview. I took my little packet that they gave me that was all about self-esteem seminars, which I didn't even really resonate with self-esteem at the time. It was just not a thing you talked about in the 80s. And I left and went back to my home, and I stopped at my parents and said, yeah, I went on this interview. And my dad said, oh, that guy's a hippie. I didn't send you to business school so you could work for a hippie. And I'm like, well, whatever. I didn't have a job. So anyway, they finally called back and said, we decided to go with somebody that has more experience in the hotel business. So I thought, all right. And then some of my friends were saying, oh, this guy's really cool. So now I have FOMO and now I'm bummed. Before I had no attachment whatsoever.
Hmm.
But since I shared it, I kind of did. So I ended up getting another job, and I did really well at that job. And I got a huge promotion one night. It was about 3 months into this new job. And the same night, Jack called and said, you know what, I made a poor choice and I would like you to come back and I want to talk to you because I think we're supposed to work together. I just keep coming back into my head. And I said, well, it's going to cost you. So you're going to have to pay me 30. That was like huge stretch, huge,
Uh-huh.
really. I mean, in today's world, that would probably be 75 or 80 for, an opening, like a new position. And so he said, okay, well, come and let's talk. And so I thought, wow, he's easy, he's nice, he's pretty generous, and I'll check it out. So I went and I took the job, and I quickly went from his secretary to the vice president of operations. And within about, I would say, a couple of years, right after I started working for him, this was in '89, he came into the office one day and said, I think we're supposed to put all these stories in a book. I tell these stories from stage. All these women are asking me about these stories. I've been hearing it over and over. It just finally,
This book.
chicken
For
soup
those
with
who
the
can
soul.
watch us, this book.
Although we didn't know the title. We didn't know what the title was going to be. So he said, I just feel like we're supposed to put these stories in a book. So we started doing that in late in the, like 1989. And in June of '93, we got published. And I became the president of Chicken Soup for the Soul probably a year later. So we had me, Jack, and then Mark Victor Hansen and Patty Hansen were running the company. And so we did that for 18 years. It was crazy. I always say it was like Mr. Toad's wild ride. I mean, it was had no idea what we were getting into. You set a goal and you think you're setting it for one reason. And our reason was if we have a best-selling book, we'll get higher speaking fees and the company will make more money. We really had no idea that it would turn into this huge global phenomena. And the only reason it did was because we were able to respond to the feedback, and people were sending in stories and sending us stories about teens and pet lovers and all kinds of things. So that whole series that started off as Chicken Soup for the Soul then turned into Women's Soul, Surviving Soul, pet lover soul, golfer soul, NASCAR lover soul, beach lover, women,
Amazing.
working moms, blah, 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 blah. It was just, I guess it was in the cards. And that's kind of how I got into the business. But at the same time, I still wasn't really on the woo-woo side, I would say. I was really running the business. I would go to workshops, I would be in the back of the room for trainings, I would collect the money and go outside and call my publisher who's in Florida. So I'd be, working the whole time. It really wasn't until we sold the company in 2008 that I had this epiphany of, okay, I've been sitting in the room with this master trainer and I haven't really taken advantage of it. And so at that point, I kind of sat back for a minute. If anybody is listening and knows what it's like to identify with a brand for so long and then sell it and then sit back and think, oh my gosh, who are we? And so that was sort of my beginning of really my self-help journey.
And then how did success principles work into this? Because that's really what a lot of Breakthrough to Success, those seminars were about, or, success principles trainer and, train the trainer. That was all from really, I would think, success principles.
It was. We sold the company in 2008. And about 2002, we started talking about Jack needing to do his next book because Chicken Soup was sort of production line at that point. We had it really down, and we had amazing co-authors, and we had a system. So it was working, and he didn't have to be in it 24/7. So maybe I kind of concocted this idea. You should write the success principles, because he'd been talking about it for years. He's been speaking about it all over. And I felt like this was sort of the next thing for him, because we needed to have him doing what's next, not staying in something that's just working, so it's as that guy who's out there in front. And so he kind of went kicking and screaming, actually. But so that's how the Success Principles came about, and that was published in 2005. And I remember we still joke about it to this day, because Jack said, as soon as I'm done writing this book on success, I'm never writing about success again. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, 20 years, actually. 20th anniversary this year. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the 20th anniversary, and he finally retired. He's like, I'm really not writing about success ever again.
Oh,
So,
that's funny.
so that's kind of how it came about, and it was really just all of the principles that we use to build a $1 billion brand in the book business, which is really unheard of. So it was all about, setting goals and visualizing, and holding yourself accountable, taking responsibility, surrounding yourself with the right people, doing all the things that we talk about in the world of self-help. And so because we had done it, we thought it was time to go back and do that. And then from there, what spawned from that was the Success Principles certification, which we then created, where we have over 5,000 trainers around the world, which was fun.
And then where did your permission granted, how did that come about for your own programs? Because your programs have been quite successful. And a lot of these, when I've been to the seminars and whatnot, people really do gravitate toward to you. Say, I want to work with Patty. And I've seen that, witnessed it firsthand. So how did that all come about? Permission granted and your whole evolution
Well,
from chicken soup for the soul and being kind of behind the scenes to in front of the scenes.
it kind of started with, I don't know exactly when it happened, but at some point after the sale of Chicken Soup, and realizing that I had been invisible for so long, even though I had 14 New York Times bestsellers, I did book tours, I sold a ton of books, but at the same time, people would call me to come and do a big keynote in front of 10,000 people in an audience, and I would always turn it down, because I was really scared. I thought I would screw it up. I didn't know how to do it. I didn't want to look foolish. Like many people, we kind of practice things in our head, don't say them out loud, and are just afraid to look stupid. It's like, oh, I've had this track record of being a best-selling author. I don't want to blow it by looking like an idiot on stage, and constantly comparing myself to Jack. And then as we were doing other workshops and trainings after Chicken Soup, I started to get that bug of like, I wanted to speak more. And he would say, I have so much to say. I don't really have time to put you on stage. And I started to get really resentful. And so at one point I got so mad that I said, I'm giving myself permission to be the B word. It's like, whoa, 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 what's going on? I'm like, I feel like I'm not supported, and I must be a really bad speaker. He's like, hold on, wait, that's not the case. Like, say more. I'm not a mind reader. And so we started to talk about how I was sort of hiding and not asking for what I needed. And so my whole mantra now is I need to give myself permission to show up, speak up, and be seen. And so I talked about it for about 3 years, and I had to get rid of all the animosity I had and all the energy around it before I could actually take it to the world, really, because I didn't want to look like a crazy lady. And so when I launched that, that was a big deal for me. And a lot of defining moments kind of came up to that, because as someone who felt like they had imposter syndrome, who was comparing myself to Jack and Mark and different things like that, even though, again, I had a lot of success, I still created a story that it wasn't really my success. I was just sort of riding on the coattails of these guys, which was completely inaccurate. And I wrote my books. I did the marketing plans. I actually wrote 300 marketing plans for every single Chicken Soup book we had. So I did my share, but I was not really giving myself credit. And then my mom got sick, and she was dying. And I was in Hawaii, and she called and said she couldn't come over because her medication was making her dizzy. And I knew it was more than that. And so I flew back, and when I walked into her room, she started having seizures. And I had actually kind of planned this whole thing. I was so freaked out. I was wondering why she was falling. It's crazy. I acted like I was a doctor. It was really, really crazy. So I don't recommend doing that. But when I walked in my mom's hospital room, she said, "They think you're a doctor." I'm like, "I know. Shh." And then she started having seizures. And then she said to me, "Promise me that you won't hide behind those men. I did not raise a daughter to be invisible. Promise me that you will show up and be seen." And that's when Permission Granted really took off, because that's what sort of gave me that spark. Like I would let myself down, but I would never, ever let my mom down. And
Mm.
so it was that really catapulted me into the next 5 years or so of really wanting to give women permission to show up. And so that's kind of my underlying driver and my why for what I do today. I work with men too, but I know that women seem to internalize a lot more than men do and are looking more for approval, I think, than men. And maybe men are too, but they're just less vocal about it.
Hmm.
But that's sort of what was my driving force to really do this.
And then also, though, your connections with so many different people, you can, hear somebody say, "Here's my challenge in business," or, really honestly, business, personal, anything really. And you can just like hone right into it and say, "You need to talk to this person," or "I need to put you in touch with that person." And I mean, how does that come about for
How does
you?
my crazy brain work?
Yeah.
Well, for starters, when I was growing up, my dad was his big mantra was you never burn a bridge. And it's not always what you know, sometimes it's who you know. And so I really prided myself on my network and who was in my network and how I could serve the network. And so I love to connect. I'm a connector. That was one of my
Mhm.
just sort of born in talents, I would say. But then with Chicken Soup for the Soul, because it was a very tough ride, we didn't get published for 4 years. I mean, everybody turned us down. We didn't make any money for the first few years that we had been published. So I had to think about every opportunity and every place that we could sell books and where were people going to go that still wanted Chicken Soup for the Soul but weren't in a bookstore. And I sold them in hair salons and nail shops and car dealerships and gas stations, like any place I could go to find a spot where somebody could actually have a chicken soup book, I would make sure it got in there. And so I think my brain just started processing very early on, like problem, solution, problem, solution, problem, solution. And so, I was always really curious, like, well, what if this could work and what would it look like? So I was never afraid of the unknown. I was always very curious, which I think is a good thing most of the time, but
Mhm.
not always. You can drive other people that need to know totally insane, which I've done on several occasions. So I think that was kind of my training ground for that. And so now when I work with an author or a speaker or even somebody in business, I can look at, all right, what are your problems? And let's look at what are your numbers and how do we back into those numbers and how do we increase those by getting creative? Or if you're an author and you're writing a book, how are you going to talk about your book? What does your marketing plan look like? What's your why behind it? Why are you passionate? What stories are you going to share? Um, so I kind of just started doing more and more of that, and I'm actually pretty good at it and I love it. And I just love helping other people. So I always say, if you have a problem, come to my house because I'll help you create a solution. It's like my favorite thing to do.
And speaking of your house, you have a couple of different programs going on. So not really permission granted. I don't know if that's going on still, but you have the audience builder program and then a speaker program. Can you tell me a little bit about those things? In addition to permission granted, if you're still doing that, or pattyaubery.com, I think has everything on it.
Yeah, so I think my underlying theme is always giving yourself permission to show up for whatever it is that you want to do. Whatever your dream is. If it's a librarian, if it's to be a mom, if it's to run a business, whatever it might be. So that's my underlying theme. And then Audience Builder Blueprint, which I'm not really crazy about the name, to be honest, is really about creating a map for your business. And what I have found over the years in this world of self-help is that it's kind of the Wild West, and people get into the business not really thinking about it so much as a business. They're excited and motivated and they've got this big dream, but they haven't really grounded it and they haven't looked at everything that needs to happen. And I use the analogy that if you were going to go build a house, you wouldn't just call up a builder and say, just start with the bathroom and I'll get the rest to you later. You need to create a blueprint. You need to know where the bathroom is. You need to make sure it's not in your entryway or in your kitchen. And so really planning that out and knowing step by step where everything is and how everything connects is really important. The same goes for business. You need to know if you're going to open up a hair salon, for example, you need to know what your rent is going to be, what the brick and mortar looks like, how much shampoo and conditioner you need, how many bowls you need, how many chairs you need, how many blow dryers you need, what do you need to make a month to cover your monthly nut, how many employees are you going to need to have, how much, all the different things that you need to do to run a business. And so often that doesn't happen. So I take people through a very intense step-by-step process to get them clear about who they are, what they do, why they do it, who they do it for, and what they're delivering, and what it costs, and how long is it, and really dig deep into clarifying all those things. So when you talk to someone and they say, "What do?" You can say what you do, and it lands, and it's not vague. So if somebody was coming to me and it was a woman who said, so what do you do? And they're 30 years old. I would say, because I've kind of mastered these things, I help women like you, build a business and have a family too. I show you how you can have it all. And I can do that because I built Chicken Soup and I raised two boys at the same time, and they're officially not axe murderers and they're happy, healthy humans. So because there's a lot of guilt around, do I work? Do I stay home? So I have a lot of stories that I can build around that in a conversation to really connect with that person emotionally, not just logically with, I have this program, it's this long, and this is what it costs. It's more about what's going on for them. So I love that program. It's pretty in depth. It's not glitz and glamour, but it's necessary. And so many people don't do that. And I find them a year later, they're into their big dream and they're upside down 50, $100,000 without a plan. So I'm passionate about really trying to solve that problem out there in this industry. And then the other thing that I love is Speaker Launchpad, which I do. And that's all about helping you craft a really killer keynote and how to get on stage and share it with others. And so that's a 4-day training that we do at my house that you're coming to, which I'm so excited
I
about.
am. I am still coming. Yes, I am.
Yes, it's still coming. And I love that because it really empowers people it gives them confidence. So many of us want to be speakers, but if we haven't actually gone out there and really practiced, and I say using your outside voice, not your inside voice, sitting at home thinking about what you would say, but really actually delivering your message in front of a group of people, it's hard to create the confidence that you need to do that. So I really love that. And I love it, especially when I'm working with authors, because I really believe that if you're going to write a book, you need to talk your book. You need to be able to tell stories about it. You need to have a keynote from stage that wraps around that book, that eventually we can create a product. So you have a product, a keynote, and a book, and they should all go together and they should go in the right order. And if you know how to do that, you can get paid to speak, which also allows you to get paid to market yourself, which also allows people to know, like, and trust you more within that 45-minute keynote because you're on stage in front of them. And then it allows them to say yes to more programs that you have, but also to buy your book and not just have it in a bookstore or on Amazon and hope and pray that someone's going to see a story on Instagram or scrolling through Facebook,
Mhm.
which is a
Well,
lot of what happens today.
I think the other piece of this is even if somebody doesn't have a book,
Mhm.
it's even, I'll just say from a woman's point of view or, an executive or an association leader, just somebody that has to be a leader to speak and get up in front of 20, 50, 100, 1,000 people to talk about something about their business or the company they're working for. Or,
Absolutely.
it's not even about the author piece, but just to have that courage and confidence to stand up and say, this is what, for example, the other day I had to say a little thing about the Realtors Relief Foundation. And it was just a quick thing. I didn't even know I was going to be really getting up and saying anything. And it was having that courage and confidence to get up there and know what you were going to say and understand, yeah, to connect with the audience.
It's so important. And I say to people, even before, if you want to write a book, go build a talk first and go out there and speak it so you can see what lands. But you're right. I mean, if you're in a boardroom, I was someplace last week, I was at a wedding and people were speaking, the maid of honor and then even the father of the bride and stuff. And they weren't holding their microphone in front of their face. So they talk with their hands. And so it's like, so I'm like, hold the
Hmm.
microphone and don't cross your legs and stand like you have confidence. And, so it's just this practicing. So when you show up, you look as intelligent when you're doing any kind of presentation as you really are, because the people I know are very intelligent. These people that I watch do these speeches are really intelligent. They're just not used to doing it with a microphone or they're just not used to doing it in a boardroom or whatever it might be. So having that confidence that allows you to have more clarity, but also the groundedness so you're in your body and you can relate to people. It's so important. And you're not just up there sort of detached, because there's an energetic field there. And when someone's really present for you and they're speaking and you feel like they're speaking directly to you, that's when you see mastery. When they're up there with a canned speech or they're trying to get their message across and it's not landing, it's because they're not in their body.
I mean, I've had that happen to me, in the negative part
Oh,
and
we
realized
all
I
have.
need to work on this. I definitely need to work on this. So, but it's been great working with you on it, and I can't wait for a couple of weeks from now to get down there. So tell me, so you're in Santa Barbara and Nashville. So I wanted to ask you about Nashville. What made you go to Nashville from California? Have you always been in California? And how long have you been in Nashville? And I know you mentioned Hawaii too, and
Yeah.
where have you raised, you have two sons that are, older now, and, where did you raise them to, being a mom and a wife and a working
Yeah, I
mom at
forgot
the
that
time?
part, didn't I?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I have 2 boys, and I have a daughter-in-law. My boys are 27 and 30, and, I always had a dream that I was in LA when I had my first son, and I drove an hour and a half each way to work. And that was like right after the Northridge earthquake. And I thought, I do not want to be on the 405 freeway. If anybody knows the 405 freeway, it's a parking lot. I do not want to
Mhm.
be on that if there's an emergency with one of my kids or something happens. And so I had this goal to be within a 3-mile radius of my son's school or wherever they were going to be by the time they were like 5. The good thing was when Chicken Soup started to take off, Jack and I both decided that we wanted to move our families out of LA. We moved to Santa Barbara. So I've been here about 31 years. And so I raised both my kids here. And literally, I couldn't have had a better situation. We both lived in the same neighborhood and we worked off of his property. So we were and their school was in our neighborhood also. We live in a little area called Hope Ranch. And so it's kind of a contained area. And the kids were within a mile of me at all times, which was such
That's
a
amazing.
blessing when,
Mm.
when you're chief chicken, as I say. So I raised them here. And then we also kind of dabbled in real estate. I built a couple homes in Hawaii on Maui, and that was fun until it wasn't, as a real estate agent. And, you've been in the business for God knows how long, 3
Mhm.
decades at least.
Okay,
2008
well,
was
don't I stop at 25 plus years.
okay,
We'll just leave it
okay,
at that.
25 years. But we all know that 2008 was not a good year to own real estate.
Yes.
And,
Mhm.
I had a house on the market for $15 million, which was not a good day. So
Mm.
actually the first house was not a bad day. I sold it. I got really creative with my marketing and I ended up selling it and I did well. But I had my second house, and when that was done, I was really, really freaked out. I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose everything that I've ever saved on this house. It was a 10,000 square foot
Mm.
house on the ocean in Maui. It was beautiful, but it was going to kill me. And this is like now 2009. We're coming into
Yeah.
2010. It's sitting, it's not moving. And so, John Gray, of all people, I'm sure he'll be okay if I use his name. He said, I think you should see my psychic. And
Is that
so,
Men Are from Mars,
yeah, men are from
Women Are
Mars,
from
women are from
Venus?
Venus.
Uh-huh, yep.
And John and Bonnie were staying at my house along with some other people from the Transformational Leadership Council, Jack and his wife, and Lisa Nichols, and a couple different people. Anyway, so I said, okay, I'll see the psychic. And this was part of my whole permission granted thing too. So I see the psychic and she says, this house is built on a vortex. Now, this is weird because when we were building the house, there was a sinkhole and we had to put 3 cement trucks full of cement into the sinkhole.
The vortex.
Yeah. And I didn't know at the time, right? And she says, so this house is here to teach you a lesson. And I'm like, well, what is the lesson? Because I need to learn it quickly. I was desperate. And she said, it's telling you that you need to use your voice or it will strangle you until you learn this lesson.
Ooh.
I was like, what on earth? I said, can't he use his voice? I'm talking about Jack. And she said, no, you have to use your voice. So this was my first real attempt at doing something on stage. It wasn't really on stage. It was in my home.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, okay. So, and I was scared to death. So I said, okay, I'll create a retreat because it was huge. It was big enough to do that. And so at the time, Janet Atwood was with me. And I said, all right, I'm going to do a retreat and we'll charge X amount of dollars. And if we have 24 people, it'll help me at least pay my overhead while I'm trying to figure this out. And she's like, great, this is a great idea. I want to be the speaker with you. I'm like, okay, fine. That was in my brave moment. Have you ever had one of those where you're like, I have this big idea and you share it with somebody?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the next day, it's not a good idea at all. And you're like, why did I say that out loud? And so I literally thought, okay, I really don't want to do this. But Janet haunted me. She haunted me and haunted me. And I was so afraid to do it. I was afraid because one, I had to convince Jack to come and do it with me. I was afraid that if it didn't do well, I would take him out of the market for a week. And he, at the time, was getting like 30,000 an hour to speak. Nobody in my team really believed that we could charge this much for a luxury retreat. So they didn't want to help me build a website. I'd never really spoken like this in front of people. And the kicker was that I was doing this for me. And that was really, really hard. Normally, if this was something that Jack had come to me and said, hey, let's do a retreat at your house, I would have been all in. I would have marketed it. I would have been excited. My team would have been excited. But because it was about me and covering my overhead, I felt selfish. And I was going to charge, the company money to rent the house. That was how I was going to make my revenue. So I struggled with it because it was just in that mindset still of like, how dare I charge the company to do this? And this feels so like it's all about me. When if we had done a retreat anywhere in Maui, we would have had to pay for a hotel or a house. It was crazy. So anyway, I tried to get out of it over and over. And finally, Janet was so frustrated with me. She had Chris, her partner and ex-husband, call me. And I've told you this story. I don't know if everybody listening has heard it, but it was in the beginning of Skype. And so Chris called me on my computer. And when it rang, I hit answer, but I didn't know that his big head was going to come up on my screen. And I was in a pajama top that was a little bit on the see-through side.
The beginning, like, I'll never forget my first text I received. I'm like, what's
Exactly.
this? Why would people be texting me when they can just call me?
Right.
Anyway.
Oh my God. I slammed the computer down. I was so embarrassed. I went and grabbed a sweatshirt and, I was laying in bed. I was working on my computer. That's why it happened.
Yeah.
And so it rings again and I answered and Chris said, well, it's a good thing we're all a close-knit family. I was like, oh my God. So anyway, he said to me, Patty, what is going on? And I said, I just feel selfish. I feel like this is my agenda. I'm doing it for the wrong reasons. He's like, listen, that's all BS. What's the minimum number you have to have there to just think straight? What do you have to make to get Jack out of your head? Like that you're going to disappoint him or he's going to miss out on business. And I said, well, if I have 5 people, it'll cover having him there for the week. He said, okay, great. That's your minimum number. What's the target? And I said, 15. He said, okay, what's the, outrageous? I said, 24. And so once Chris kind of talked me off the ledge and I came up with a bare bones number that I knew would cover my overhead and cover the cost of bringing Jack in and so forth, it freed up my energy. I felt so paralyzed before. And because I was scared. I'd never done it before. And I think a lot of us get scared and paralyzed, and then we just give up and we just say, oh, forget it. That was stupid. But Chris wasn't going to let me give up, and neither was Janet. So I always say, surround yourself with people who believe in you more than you believe in yourself, because we need
Interesting.
that.
Can you say that again? Say that
Surround
again.
yourself with people who believe in you more than you believe in yourself. Because there's going to be those days where you're going to feel like, what the heck am I doing? And they're going to be there to remind you. And Chris and Janet were absolutely there 1,000% to remind me. And so we did the retreat, and it was a success. We had 24 people. I said five
Oh,
words, 5 words at my first retreat. But I will say that we did our last retreat before Jack retired in June, and it was our 31st retreat. It was a $10 million big idea over that lifespan from 2009 to 2024. And I was so close to giving up on it because I was afraid. Not because it wouldn't work, not because I'd been turned down by anybody, because I was freaked out and scared to death. But it was really a turning point for me. And believe it or not, it started to work, and my team was like, let's do another one. And they were loving it. They're in Maui, they're in this beautiful home. They're like, this is great every 3 months. And once
mm-hmm.
the energy started flowing, about 18 months in, house sold.
There you
So
go.
it's like all those things, that stuck energy, when we take action, even if it's not, even if we don't know where we're going, as long as we're in motion, things begin to happen. And the house sold, and it was great, and it was also kind of a bummer. But then we looked at, all right, so where else do we want to go in the world? And we literally got out a map and started throwing darts at a map. We're like, Italy, Dubai, and so we went all over the world
Oh, you
doing these
did? I
luxury
did not know
retreats.
that. So these were the
Yeah,
luxury retreats that you
yeah,
do
that
you
was
think you're
fun.
gonna have more of them going forward in the
I think
future?
so. I think so. I think I love them. I love to get people together for 4 days at a time and just really talk about, what do you want? What's getting in the way? And other people that are at that same caliber that just want to connect with other people and network. But I've met some of my dearest friends. I met Darlene at the first retreat,
Mm.
who, is my partner in Goal Friends, which is the nonprofit. We have been thick as thieves since that first training. Almost everybody I know, I've met through some sort of workshop or training, that have become lifelong friends. I mean, you and I, we talk all
Same
the
here.
time,
Yeah,
it's,
I
it's
I
crazy.
don't yeah, I don't go I mean, I generally, we don't do, vacations, but more of retreats, whether they're business
Mhm.
retreats or personal development. And I've met some wonderful, that are lifelong friends,
Yep.
and that have been just a great part of our lives. My life, my husband's, my kids. It's been really amazing to
Yeah.
experience that. Yeah.
It's
So
been it's been a crazy ride. I mean, if you had asked me, when I graduated high school, I got like best eyes and most likely not to succeed. I was not a great student, So, if you had asked me, where will you be, in 30 years or whatever, I don't think I ever would have thought I would be a best-selling author, have changed a lot of lives and lived a beautiful life, but also one that I have so much passion for. And I'm not the kind of person that could do the same thing over and over again. So it's really allowed me to get really creative with different things. And so it's been great. And it was all from setting that first goal, going out for that interview, and following my intuitive self. I mean, I had offers for $120,000 for a different job, but something, and it would have paid off well, and it would have been great, but something said, do this. And at the time, I didn't know who Jack Canfield was. I didn't know anything about the industry, especially he was in education, so I really didn't. Um, and it was foreign, but something said, do this. And my parents were not happy, but I did it anyway. And I'm so glad that I listened to my inner self, because typically when we listen to that little idea, that little thing that shows up right when you get out of the shower in the morning, that one big idea
mhm.
that you're excited about at 9 a.m. that sounds insane by 4 p.m. When we take action on those things, they almost always work. So if you leave this interview or you listen to this podcast and you've heard anything, when you have those inspired actions or those ideas, share them with people, because if you share them, Others will hold you accountable. It's when we keep our dreams inside, nobody knows we have this big secret. So if we flake on ourselves, nobody will know,
Right.
you know?
Well, let me ask you this. So then, as we kind of wrap up a little bit, but I don't want to wrap up. Nashville. So what made you go to Nashville then? Was that kind of one of the darts that you were throwing at a map or?
Nashville was a couple friends of mine had moved there and said, look, it's a really good investment right now. It's a great place to be. There's some tax advantages and so forth. So I went out there and I thought, why not? I'll try it. So I just bought a small starter home, compared to California prices, it's like nothing. And so I
Mhm.
thought, why not? And then I loved it and the investment really paid off. And so I thought I'll buy another one. And so I have another one that's a lot bigger, which now I'm back to the model of let's do workshops because I have this
Workshops
big
at your
house.
house.
Yeah.
Exactly. What do you see yourself doing more of like luxury retreats or speaker training, whatnot? I mean, what do you see in the future for you and, training and speaking?
I really want to focus on helping people build their brand and their messaging. So whether that's through speaking or books or elevating their brand, but connecting all the dots. So it's I like to be a one-stop shop where I can help them from the time of inception of an idea to crafting the right messaging, to having a killer keynote, to having the right products, to having the right website, to being on the right platform, all done in one place so I can help save them from themselves, really, because I understand the business and I know where the potholes are and I know where the deep ditches are for money. And I like to get people to be efficient and, you know, be mindful about their investment so they can turn a profit very quickly. So that's kind of where my passion lies.
Would have saved a lot of money had I run something by you
Those phone
a
calls.
couple years ago. But, now I know better. Call Patty. Run it by Patty.
Yes, if you have a question about this, call me, please.
Runitbypatty.com. I actually like that
Me too.
first. But you're at pattyaubery.com. Finally, the last thing I really want to say, like after all the personal development things I've been to over the years, and I will tell you, it's that breakthrough to success one where you really spoke about E plus R equals O. So much so that landed so. I'll never forget listening to Mary Jo, my daughter. She was doing a podcast one time, and I just happened to be listening to it, not with me, but she brought up, do you know how I was blown away when she said, well, there's E plus R equals O. The event plus your response to the event equals really the outcome. How do you want to have that outcome? Your response is a big piece of that. And I was so amazed how that landed with her that she brought it up in a whole different part of our lives. I was listening to her when she was at Chapman. And I just want to thank you for that because that was that's what to me, I think you're known for that. E plus R equals
Yeah.
O.
Well,
Do you
it's
want to
so
end with
important.
something like that so that we can leave that with that wonderful equation?
Sure. So basically, it's all about taking 100% responsibility. And I'm sure if I was in a room with a bunch of people that are listening and said, how many of you want more responsibility? Nobody would raise their hand. But the reality is, if you write out that word responsibility and turn it around, we all have the ability to respond differently. And I feel like what happens in today's day and age, in today's world, is we're running so busy that we're reacting to events. We're reacting to the guy that cut us off. We're reacting to our spouse coming in the house saying they had a bad day. We're reacting to our kids instead of intentionally choosing how we want to respond. So these knee-jerk reactions don't create outcomes that we want. If my husband walks in and says, I had a bad day, and I respond with, you think your day was bad, dinner's going to look a lot different than if I respond intentionally with, tell me more, honey. What did that look like for you? Even if I don't care, it's all about
Mhm.
having the intention. And so if you can just know that we all have the ability to respond differently to every event in our life, we will have different outcomes. And by the way, a lot of those events are events that happen in our heads. Events are thoughts. So my thought of, oh, I can't do this big training at my Maui house because that's selfish. That was an event. And I had to intentionally choose a different response with the help of outside people because I shared my vision, which was no, Patty, it's okay. You're allowed to win also. you know, and it turned out really, really well. But so all of those things, it's really important. So if you just write down E plus R equals O, events happen, we can't control them. Sometimes we can't, they're in our head. But for the most part, external events can't be controlled. The only thing we can do is control the way we respond. So if we stop reacting and start responding, we'll have much better outcomes and better results in the future.
Well, I think we need to end on that.
All
Sounds
right.
good to me. And how should people contact you? PattyAubery.com, your
Yeah,
site there, and
PattyAubery.com, and it's Aubery. It's
mhm.
PattyAubery.com. Yeah,
And
everything's
you're
there, all my
hosting, are you
programs.
doing something in September? I know it's a little late for August, but September you're doing a speaker
I'm
training?
doing a speaker launch pad at the end of September. We still have about 5 spots left. If anyone's interested, it's a great training, and make sure you reach out, and I'd be happy to support you.
Terrific. Patty, thank you again. And I will see you in person in a couple of weeks.
All
Looking
right.
forward to it.
Good to see you. Thanks,
Bye.
Nora. Thanks for having me
Thank
on.
you.